The Japanese army were known during the Second World War for being brutal war criminals who carried out large-scale executions of civilians. On the run-up to Nanking, even before the war broke out in Europe, two Japanese officers had a race to see who could execute 100 people, the quickest using their swords. In reality, these men were just executing unarmed civilians and leaving a sea of destruction and devastation wherever they went. But there is a story which has lived on in infamy during the Second World War, and it happened towards the end of the conflict in 1945, during the Battle of Ramree Island, and a number of Japanese forces were allegedly attacked by crocodiles, and inside of the infected swamps they were mauled by the saltwater beasts, some of which measured over 20 feet big. But what is the story of this? Join us today to look at the horrific death of the Japanese soldiers eaten by crocodiles, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. It was in 1945 that the war came to an end in Europe and the Pacific. Hitler had been defeated in the May, taking the easy way out inside his bunker, but the war still rolled on in the Pacific. But as the year began, one of the deadliest battles the Japanese soldiers endured was the Battle of Ramree, which was an island in Myanmar or Burma. But the Japanese had to deal with another kind of predator, as well as dealing with the British Army. The British ruled over Burma from 1824 to 1948, and it was for decades a British colony, and it was ruled as part of India during World War I. It was also made a crown colony, but as the Japanese sought to expand across Asia during the Second World War, they turned their attention to Burma. The Japanese had helped in forming the Burma Independence Army, and the Burmese hoped to get the support of the Japanese to try and expel the British so that the nation could become independent. Japanese Burma was an independent state on the 1st of August 1943, but many Burmese believed that the Japanese would go back on their word regarding independence. But Ramree Island is found on the south coast of Burma, and the Japanese occupied it in 1942 after defeating the British Navy. However, in 1945 the British then fought back and they tried to recapture it. British soldiers arrived to retake Ramree on the 26th of January 1945. They were planning to build a new airbase there. However, they first had to get rid of the Japanese that were on the island and clear it. The assault troops landed unopposed on the beaches to the west and secured the beachhead, and the next day more troops landed, and then the 71st Infantry Brigade travelled south down the west coast. They continued to occupy different settlements and travelled towards the south. Also, a Royal Marine Force landed on the island next door and found it unoccupied. But the Ramree Japanese garrison fought very hard and tried to resist the advancing British forces as much as they could. The British managed to outflank a Japanese stronghold, and then the defenders abandoned the base and tried to link up with a bigger Japanese army across the island. But this route took the Japanese through 10 miles of mangrove swamp, and they struggled through it, and the Brits encircled the area. The Japanese became trapped in the deep mud-filled land, and they also suffered from tropical diseases, but inside of the swamp were saltwater crocodiles. The mangrove forest on Ramree Island is home to a large amount of saltwater crocodiles, which are considered the biggest giant reptilian killer in the world. They can grow to a length of well over 20 feet in length and can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, and if a human went up against them, they would not last very long. Crocodiles this big are rare, but a normal sized one could kill in seconds an adult. Humans have ventured into crocodile territory for years, and they have a deep history of being attacked, and the crocodiles on Ramree saw the Japanese forces as prey. In the swamp, things were already bad, with the soldiers dying from dehydration, malnutrition and illnesses, and they had to try and deal with the mosquitoes, venomous spiders and snakes, as well as scorpions, and these were considered another killer. The wounded and ill soldiers were the first to be eaten by the crocodiles in the swamp as they fell behind, and then at times the crocodiles appeared from nowhere. They would steal their victims and drag them under the water. A number of British soldiers would report that the crocodiles attacked the Japanese in the swamp. One written account came from a British soldier who said, "That night of February 19th, 1945 was the most horrible that any member of the motor launch crews ever experienced. The crocodiles, alerted by the din of warfare and the smell of blood, gathered around the mangroves, lying with their eyes just above the water, watchfully alert for their next meal. With the ebb of the tide, the crocodiles moved in on the dead, wounded and uninjured men who had become mired in the mud. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp, punctured by the screams of the wounded men, crushed in the jaws of the huge reptiles, and the blurred, worrying sounds of spilling crocodiles, made a cacophony of hell that has rarely been duplicated on Earth. At dawn, the vultures arrived to clean up what the crocodiles had left. It was reported on the 24th of February that the Japanese, whilst trying to escape, had been forced by hunger out of the mangrove swamps, with many of them being killed by the crocs. The crocodiles in the Ramree swamps made many other soldiers believe that the animals had a significant role in the Battle of Ramree, and one soldier said, when the army landed, they drove the Japanese into the swamps, and the crocodiles killed hundreds of them. They used to call the crocodiles the Allies. Another man recounted the event and said, over 1,000 soldiers of the Japanese garrison retreated into the crocodile-infested mangrove swamps. We went in with boats and interpreters using loud hailers asking them to come out. Not a single one did. Saltwater crocodiles, some of them over 20 feet long, frequented these waters. It is not difficult to imagine what happened to the Japanese who took refuge in the mangroves. Another veteran would recount the battle, and he said, after a few weeks we managed to push the Japanese to the swamp on the other side of the island, which was full of crocodiles. They decided to take their chances in the swamp rather than to surrender, and only a handful came out alive. It's believed that around 500 Japanese soldiers entered the mangrove swamps, but only around 20 of them came out after being captured by the British, meaning that around 500 never made it out of the swamp alive. A special military tribunal was set up to investigate what happened, and it was confirmed that the victims of the attack were the Japanese soldiers, and it was said that within every 3 metres of the swamp there was 24% human blood found inside of the water. Some even estimated that up to 1,000 could have been attacked by the animals. There have been some historians who have tried to question the events inside of the swamp. One said, if thousands of crocodiles were involved in the massacre, as in this much, how have these monsters survived before, and how are they to survive later on? The ecosystem of the mangrove swamp simply would not have permitted the existence before the coming of the Japanese. Another said that the event unanimously discounted any suggestion that large amounts of Japanese fell to prey of the crocodiles, saying that the only crocodile-related deaths occurred when 10 to 15 soldiers were killed trying to ford Ming Chang, a tidal creek. But after the war had come to an end, the Allies did speak to the Japanese War Office about this, and this body did not say if it had happened or not. But in 2016 a historian found documentation stating that the Japanese soldiers had drowned, and many had also been shot, but then the crocodiles scavenged on the bodies after their deaths. One man would arrive on Ramree Island following the end of the main battle, and he spoke to other members of the Sea Reconnaissance Unit that were based there, and he wrote how at one point the men had to abandon their paddleboards during the battle and climb up a mangrove tree to avoid a saltwater crocodile. It was said they then heard shouting and rifle fire during the night far from the Allies' position, and vultures often appeared over the areas that the British forces had never reached. The historian concluded that the Japanese had died from many other factors and reasons, but the crocodiles did play a part in this. That is most probably the likely outcome of what occurred on Ramree Island. The Japanese were driven into the swamp, and many would have succumbed to disease and bites from mosquitoes and other animals, including scorpions and snakes. It was very dangerous territory, and they cut across the swamp to try and outmaneuver the British and to escape, but inside the swamp many died, and it's my opinion that the crocodiles did attack and feasted on the bodies of those who had succumbed to the conditions of the swamp. But it's also probable that they did attack a select number of alive soldiers, but they probably didn't kill 100 soldiers as mentioned before. But the story continues to captivate still to this day. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.